welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool. On the 1st of August 2018, thousands of women across South Africa took to the streets to protest against gender-based violence under the banner #TheTotalShutdown. A memorandum of understanding was handed to President Cyril Ramaphosa, comprised of 24 demands for actions to be taken against gender-based violence. One of these demands was for a national action plan against GBV. Almost 2 years later, a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide has been developed, adopted, and is nearing implementation. Tonight we will be discussing what is a national strategic plan, how will it tackle gender-based violence, and what does it mean for women across the country. But before that, let's have a look at how the NSP was developed.
We are glad that you are finally here to receive this. Our main concern here and our main demand is that we need to have a gender summit before the 28th of August. All of these women are going to be there. Yes. Your departments are going to be there. You will convene it. Treasury will be there. And you'll ensure that what comes out, those outcomes are going to be budgeted for. That's a non-negotiable. Please understand us when we say that is a non-negotiable. Thousands of women are on the ground, thousands in every single province. Saying no means no.
On the 1st of August 2018, a movement called #TheTotalShutdown Women's Movement took to the streets of our country in an attempt to hold the government accountable and demand for responsive action towards the crisis and increasing rates of gender-based violence and femicide. #TheTotalShutdown Women's Movement was born on social media after a group of angry women had enough of the increasing rates of violence and wanted a coordinated response from government to the violence endured. After long weeks of planning and mobilizing resources for the National March Against Gender-Based Violence, #TheTotalShutdown Women's Movement was able to organize close to 100,000 women across the country to march to various meeting points, including the union buildings, to hand over a list of 24 demands to President Cyril Ramaphosa. One of the demands of the women's movement was for the presidency to host a presidential summit against gender-based violence and femicide with both civil society and government, and to respond by collectively developing a multi-sectoral response that would address the mass violence against women across all diversities, as well as violence against children.
Coming up with a national strategic plan was that we need to be reflecting more. What kind of theories are we going to bring? Or what kind of responses? Yeah, what is happening around us? What is happening within civil society? That is why we also invited people into a room and say, can we talk about this? So we had the theory of change meeting, and then it also set in motion the planning of how then do we reimagine a national strategic plan for gender-based violence.
The first ever presidential summit was hosted on the 1st and 2nd of November 2018, where 1,200 delegates convened to formally address and develop the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide National Strategic Plan, also known as the NSP, to facilitate a coordinated national response to the violence plaguing our society. The summit had a number of other outcomes, including the Presidential Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Declaration, to which serves as a commitment that the presidency, working with civil society and South Africa at large, acknowledges this process and is committed towards the eradication of gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. In 2019, a number of consultative meetings occurred to engage various stakeholders in the design process and the drafting of the theory of change of the National Strategic Plan. These meetings included government representatives and local leadership structures, civil society organizations, and broader citizens of the community to give insights on how they need the NSP to respond to their provincial and local problems.
Gender-based violence comes in many forms, right? When physical violence, when sexual violence, when economic violence, when psychological violence, when rape, when sexual abuse of girls, when sexual harassment, trafficking, femicide, cyber violence, violence as a result of sexual orientation, violence as a result of sexual and or gender identity, structural violence that is directed at women because she is a woman.
Umuntu wesifazane needs to go through a criminal justice system, sesikhuluma ngama-courts. Umuntu wesifazane kumele access, those different sectors. Sometimes akaphumi ku-relationship because I am unable to provide for my family.
The sharing of experiences by those who attended the meetings was facilitated in order to better inform this process. People raised a number of concerns they've encountered in their communities when dealing with gender-based violence and further highlighted the national urgency for all of us to proactively deal with this crisis.
I've been involved in work on gender-based violence for many years, and I think bringing government and civil society together at such a strategic level, it's been an interesting journey and also a lot of time pressure, given where the country is, given the urgency of what we need to do. So it's been a pressured road, but an important road, because I think it's about forging relationships, forging ways of working together, learning how to trust, learning, each other's different worlds and how to come together around a common agenda. So I think it's about learning what those different worlds are, what those different perspectives are, but also I think at the same time how important it is for us to work together, because we actually need civil society, we need government, we need communities, we need the private sector. We all need to be coming together, and we come with different lenses, different experiences. So it's also about learning to respect those different experiences, to embrace those differences, but also to build connections around the points of connection of trying to move us all forward in the country.
So the thing we want to gain when we go out to raise the awareness about gender-based violence, and even a campaign la kuzomenywa khona abantu besifazane and work raise awareness about gender-based violence.
Through 6 pillars that inform the desired outcomes of this policy, the National Strategic Plan intends to set the tone towards the promotion and creation of a just, equal, and safe society that protects and nurtures the lives of everyone. At the same time, it gives impetus to Outcome 3 of the National Development Plan 2030 and provides a coherent national framework to support South Africa in meeting sustainable development goals. To achieve this vision, South Africa will be required to fast-track progress towards achieving its outcomes over the next 5 years.
Our objective must be to bring this number or rate to 0. We must aim for a femicide rate of 0.
Civil society activists, organizations, and movements will continue to ensure that the NSP is rolled out and implemented. As the women of this country, we remain resolute in challenging the structures that continue to oppress us, and we will use the NSP as a mantra towards the creation of a just, healed, and free country for everyone.
Welcome back. You're watching The Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool, and we're speaking about the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. Joining us tonight to discuss this is Kwezilomso Mbandazayo, who is the Women's Rights and Gender Justice Program Manager at Oxfam and a representative of a new movement called the Call to Action Collective that is holding a series of webinars around the NSP to explain what it is, what it means. Hi, Kwezilomso, thank you for joining us.
Evening, Lelina, and thank you for having me.
So, Kwezilomso, we've seen that the National Strategic Plan has been in development for around 2 years. It's just been adopted and we're heading towards implementation. I think maybe we could start with just what is a National Strategic Plan and sort of, I guess, what does it mean in the policy environment, on the ground? Like, why should we care about this?
Okay, thanks for this question. I mean, Lelina, so the kind of writing of the NSP that we have now has taken, has been a build-up from our 2018 moment. However, this is a demand that has been coming from civil society for at least about a decade. And really what it is that it is a policy framework that is meant to rally, different sectors of society, different sectors of government, different sectors of the private sector together into a coherent, long-term response to the crisis of gender-based violence and femicide in the country. So it's a framework that brings us together in how we are meant to respond. The idea is that we have a costed framework with very clear lines of accountability, very clear lines of who is supposed to be doing what, and very clear lines of, consistent monitoring and evaluation, research, gathering information to see what is the nature and texture of the violence, what is the nature and texture of the response, and what is the response that is needed.
Thank you. And that sounds, it sounds amazing. And I'm just going to come in and ask, so does that mean that those things were not happening previously? And I think what I'm trying to get to is what sort of changes we can expect to see with the National Strategic Plan. I'm thinking perhaps specifically lines of accountability that previously there were huge issues with.
So I think some of the big gaps are about coordination and accountability. So it isn't that we haven't, as different sectors of the country, been doing work to fight the scourge of GBV, and it doesn't mean that with an NSP, those various initiatives need to kind of cease, and we kind of only look to one magic potion. That's not the idea. But what is quite a problem is that, for example, one sector of government will be running their own programs that do not necessarily speak at cross purposes with another. So say the Department of Social Development has a program around prevention, which does not necessarily speak to a program around economic empowerment, or is at cross purposes, that doesn't speak to what is happening in the kind of justice sector and cluster. And so to have a more coordinated framework means a lot of the work that's been bitty, we can have a way to now monitor it in a more coordinated way. So that was one of the big gaps. And I think a second more obvious gap, Lenina, is that our levels of gendered violence in the country are extremely high. Our understandings are not what they can be and what they should be. And we sat as a country with no plan, with no, countrywide, this is our offering into the to the crisis. There's bits and pieces here and there, but the effort and the coordination was not and is not meeting the texture of the problem. So this is one intervention that seeks to try and coordinate in as much as possible different sectors. But again, I do want to emphasize that the existence of an NSP does not mean and should not mean the undermining of other initiatives, especially ones that are community-based, especially ones that are more grounded.
Thank you, Kwezilomso. And that, yes, what you're saying is very important. I know that part of the development of the NSP focused heavily on the involvement of civil society organizations so that it could be a collective national plan. There were, however, concerns raised across different platforms about, accountability structures early on, and perhaps this is something that happens, with everything on such a large scale. Right now, where we are is in the process of appointing a council who will oversee, I think it's the implementation of the National Strategic Plan. Could you perhaps give us more insight around that process, around the concerns of the council? Are they still there?
So, within the Call to Action Collective, our idea and the work that we're doing is about saying we have an NSP now. It is not a perfect framework. It is not a perfect document, but it does have a lot of what has been wanted in the past, and and it's a good piece of work. What is most important before we so the NSP itself makes space in the appointment of a council that there needs to be a legislative body or a kind of legislative framework that governs this council. That the appointment of a council is 51% civil society and the rest state entities. What we are saying is that this process cannot be rushed and should not be rushed, that we need to do quite a bit of popular education around what does the NSP say in and of itself? Who does it commit to what? What are some of the critical gaps that need further development? And with, feeling more comfortable about it, then we can set out how and the kinds of people, the kinds of abilities, the kinds of experience that we need to hold to be in a council that holds the plan for the whole country, so that we do not appoint a council before we have set out clear terms of reference, clear lines of accountability, and we followed, we have a clear legislative framework that can govern the council itself and the GBV fund that is attached to that council. So the worries were that the state was trying to fast track this process, and what we're saying is it's too important to be done too quickly, and we need to have the right amount of the kind of the people in the council who know exactly what they're there to do and who have the popular support in terms of what they're doing, and that we can keep to the integrity of the lines of accountability as envisaged in the NSP itself.
Okay. Thank you. That's a really good explanation. Could I ask though, in other sort of sectors we have legislated councils, and I was wondering if we are looking at a similar framework for the NSP. So for example, social workers have a South African Council for Social Work Practitioners. I know that attorneys sort of have a Legal Practice Council. These are all legislated, and most recently, although not a council, the Western Cape Child Commissioner, in that role is also legislated, that sets out roles and responsibilities, accountability structures, etc. Do you mean something similar to that, where there is specific legislation that brings it into being, and where I guess there is monitoring that can happen because the roles are legislated?
Quite broadly, yes. And part of the process that we are engaging in around this webinar series is also looking at comparative examples. So, some of the discussions that are happening include that legislation is not, a straight line to ensuring effective implementation. And we agree, but also not legislating is also, not the straight line to effective implementation. So what we're doing is we're going to try as best as possible to get ideas, to get models comparatively from within the country and from outside about what does governing legislation that really again gives more power into the framework and its effective implementation look like and feel like. So we are we're envisioning a framework that is informed by experience. Yeah, because we can't be making the same mistakes that are made with other frameworks,
Yeah.
even though there'll be mistakes within this process as well.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask about the Call to Action Collective. As I understand it, it is a series of webinars that is aimed at educating people about the National Strategic Plan. Could you just tell us a little bit more about sort of how the sort of formal structure came about and why it is so necessary?
So the Call to Action Collective is a group of mostly organizations and individuals working on ending GBV in the country. So we all kind of in our different spaces do work on ending GBV and organizing ourselves within the Call to Action Collective to say what are some of the joint initiatives, how do we make the movement a bit stronger and a bit more coherent. The collective started organizing itself around 2018, and we were quite involved then also in supporting and in being part of the total shutdown marches of August 2018. We've done quite a lot of discourse work, we've done quite a bit of service provision work, and we've done quite a lot of protest work. So we're also the collective that organized with the Santin shutdown marches. So it really is a group of us, a bit loosely formed, just trying to say, how can we be better organized within the sector? And this is one of the programs that we are investing in and that we think are really important.
Okay. Just one more question, I think, before we conclude, is that what can people do? So we're looking at, the National Strategic Plan. This is a huge thing for South Africa. It is a huge thing in the GBV sector. And I think that everyone should really be involved with this. What are ways that people, and especially communities, people on the ground, women at home, what are ways that they can get involved with the National Strategic Plan and engage with it on different levels, not just now during sort of figuring out the implementation, but also moving forward? And I think, if I may just add, how people should engage with policy and legislation around gender-based violence in general, because it's often not framed as a big way, a big part of GBV. We know that it's there. We know we have the Domestic Violence Act and the Sexual Offences Act, but engagement with it is really still not sort of a big thing that we think about all the time.
So I think it's really important for us to foster a culture of, there's one of the songs that we like to sing on the streets of protest that says yonke indawo umzabalazo uyasivumela, right? Which is, we need to be everywhere doing everything. That the policy space doesn't only belong to policymakers and to legislators. And so for me, the idea is that we need to engage with existing policies, break them down for ourselves, break them down in our organizations to say, what does this policy say? Does it meet the needs of my community, of my organization, of my space? How can I see myself in this framework? What are some of the things that I could do, build on, make better that are within this framework? So, for example, one of the things that I think is a big possibility, just one example from the NSP, is that it gives way to district level structures and community level structures around accountability, around prevention, etc. So what we really would love to see, and what I think would be important, is if collectives of women, collectives of organizations would find themselves in that and say, look, we're going to take messaging around positive femininities and masculinities and social cohesion, and we're going to go to our municipality. And in our IDP processes, we want to ensure that there are budget lines that are given to these items, to this communication element. And we're going to push for that, and we're going to design a 4-year program that we will then look at against what we have in this NSP, but also build on and grow. So just as a way to say the tool is there, and it's really important for us to educate each other and ourselves about what this tool says and means, so that we can go to the people it binds and say, you are bound to A, B, and C. We are here offering A, B, and C. Let's work together. Or you need to account for why your budget doesn't reflect work on X and Y. So it's something we need to get our teeth into, like we should with all other frameworks that that directly affect our lives, which is all the frameworks that exist.
Yeah, Kwezilomso, thank you. Those were wonderful examples about how people can get practically involved. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the time.
We will take a short break and we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. We're chatting about the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, and before the break, we spoke to Kwezilomso Mbandazayo about civil society's reaction and response to the NSP. Now we're going to be speaking to somebody who's working directly with the National Strategic Plan and look at how it will be rolled out and implemented.
The crux of the NSP is that most of the legislation that we had, we were more reacting after GBV has happened. Now, the NSP is now anchoring prevention as core, that at the local level, at home, at communities, in the churches, in the private sector, that we stop it before happening, so that ultimately we eradicate gender-based violence.
Thank you. So that's very interesting, because a lot of narrative does say there's more emphasis currently on responding than there is on prevention. So it's definitely needed. We know that the final version of the NSP was handed over in May 2020. It is now moving towards implementation. What will that look like?
If you see the NSP already, it has key interventions inside. It has the different types of activities that you want. The NSP has 6 pillars. So the first pillar that we have talks about accountability and leadership. Now, if you look at that pillar only, that pillar says we are all accountable and responsible to eradicate gender-based violence. Different pockets of programs are happening, including money that is given to civil society organizations. And it said, if you are receiving money for gender-based violence, let's all be accountable for the resources that we have, because those resources are supposed to add in the prevention, in the response, in the eradication of gender-based violence. So each and every pillar, you go to the pillar of prevention, it has key or lead accountability departments, including the support. The support will be departments or civil society or private sector that have a role in that pillar. So the activities are already in there. There are clear outcomes of what we want to see from each activity. So each and every person now, you are not going to go out and have a new plan. We are now, just on Monday, we had an NSP implementation workshop where we are coordinating now activities to ensure that we've got a seamless plan where everybody will know what they are doing at this time. Remember, this is a 5-year and 10-year plan. So we need now to start to say, what can we do now at the immediate level that can be achievable, that all of us can rally around and ensure that at the local level, people know that now when you respond, this is how you respond. When you prevent, this is how you prevent. So we had a full workshop on Monday with private sector, with government, with CSOs on coming with what we call a 100-day sprint. We are saying gender-based violence is an emergency. We have had the president even adopting the UN language that is a pandemic. And if it's a pandemic, we cannot continue planning as if we have not planned. So we're saying, let's sprint and look at the low-hanging fruits of things that we can do immediately for 100 days. And all of us do that, and we're able to then look at the expected results, evaluate if those results have given us what we're looking for, and continue. So we're doing that in the coming 2 weeks. We have finalized the 100-day sprint programs, and then the secretariat is now even going to provinces, going meaning online, not going to provinces, because we have to have the structure at the provincial level that needs to be chaired by the premier. And also at the province, at the local level, we want to have also another structure that is chaired by different mayors, so that in each and every local municipality, we're implementing the NSP. There is no other plan now that as a country we must rally around except this plan that has been consulted upon widely, and we now, people are saying this is the best plan to eradicate gender-based violence. So this is how we think it will look like. From August, we all have to be running with this 100 sprint program.
Thank you. Mr. Ramagoshi, you're speaking about accountability and leadership. There have been some concerns about sort of one of the next steps for implementation, which is the appointment of a council. Now, obviously, we do need a body to oversee the implementation of the NSP. I think one of the concerns was that the document calls for the body to be legislated, and it hasn't been legislated yet. Can you tell us a little bit more about if the council body is not legislated, in what structure will that council be appointed, and how will that accountability chain look like?
The NSP and the council was approved by cabinet in March. And when cabinet approved the NSP, including this council, cabinet recognized that in the document, we want legislation. And they said, unfortunately, gender-based violence is high now. You can't wait to have a structure while women and children are dying. Let's have the council in place, and then the council can pursue the legislation part. And they even gave an example of bodies that are operational that don't have legislation. And one of them is SANAC. That SANAC has a board of trustees, and it has been working so well to deal with issues of HIV and AIDS. That yes, we want to have legislation. Legislation, I mean, constitutionally, you know that you need to consult broadly, and it can take a year or so. So let's have a council, and the council still being independent. In the document, there is a number that was put on the number of CSOs and government, that we wanted 51% CSOs and 49% government. And that is what this body was supposed to. Let's have 7 people from NGOs and 6 from government. And these then must start with implementing the NSP, while in the meantime looking at legislation. Now, the meeting that we had with some CSOs, because it was not everybody from the country who attended, they really were saying, are we not running ahead and having this structure that, I mean, the council that is not legislated? And what they said to government can continue implementing the NSP while we're putting legislation in place. And in that meeting, what we requested was that, unfortunately for government, we cannot wait for the council to be in place. We want to start implementing, and they agreed. So we then asked in that meeting, can we have volunteers per pillar? People who are now working in each different pillar to volunteer, so that it's not government only implementing. We've got private sector and CSOs, and we did get volunteers. Some of them were not in that meeting. They've been writing to the minister, they've writing to the president to say, we like this document and we have expertise, we want to volunteer. So in the meeting of Monday, it was about those that have said we can volunteer because we've got expertise in different, whether it's in response, in legislation, in research, in the economic space, to volunteer and assist in getting the NSP on board. And we're doing that. That we now are starting with those who are volunteering per pillar. So the accountability will be accountability per pillar for people who are now working per pillar. We have been, the minister as the chairperson of the interministerial committee has been asked by the president to report weekly. So we cannot not start working now. So each pillar will report to the IMC weekly, and those reports will be then consolidated and be reported to the president, because he does not want to see us dropping the ball. We continue with what we did with the IRAP, the 6 months that we had from last year, that weekly, let's report and see if the programs we have in place are making any, are giving us results. If not, where are the challenges and how we can unlock challenges from local level, province, and national.
That sounds very good. Mr. Ramagoshi, as we move towards implementation, and you speak about the volunteers and going forward, and also that this being a holistic and coordinated sort of plan that involves multiple departments, as opposed to working in silos. What can women at home and citizens at home expect to see? And perhaps it might not be immediate results, as with every plan, but what can we be expecting, given that, you know, some of the failings that are often reported, and I'm just pulling the top ones that we see all the time. It's police responses to gender-based violence, you know, lack of support for getting protection orders, perhaps not being able to access social workers, and then obviously there's the justice system with bail and parole, which are ones that come out all the time. So those are sort of very specific on the ground issues that come out every year when there's a march or when there is an issue. What can we expect within that realm for somebody on the street at home that would possibly need to utilize services?
What we expect that people will see at the ground, because the critical mass of structures are going to be at the local level. If you look at the 7 and the 6, we're saying we do not want a structure that is heavy on top. We want to see in each and every locality that there are structures that will be able to respond immediately when gender-based violence happens. We even now on Monday, as part of the 100-day sprints, that will have what we call a heat map. Almost the same map that we have when with hotspots. But now with NSP, we're talking about heat map, because it's not about where violence is happening, it's where services should be. So the heat map is about services in the country, and we will see if in a locality there are no services, the map should show red, because we're saying, so it means you must enhance, whether to put social workers there, whether to have another entity there. And because the structure at the community level will be community-led, including government, if as a woman goes to the police and does not get service, immediately that structure must get involved. Immediately the structure must write to the national one, but to the police to take action. I think you have already heard the minister was saying the police now they are busy with training. There are unfortunately rotten potatoes everywhere, and those are the ones that need to be reported and action be taken. And there are those that are doing sterling work that have been working with NGOs. So we must strengthen the ones that are working well, but we must call out those that are failing. Social development are now putting also more social workers. They have recruiting more 600 social workers in place, and most of those will be put in in communities, rural areas, where at this point in time there isn't much. So we are saying to communities, because you are going to take responsibility of GBV in your area, ensure that if the structure does not satisfy, that they ask that we beef up the structures and have a coordinated structure to deal with gender-based violence. But also because we are stressing prevention, we're saying even when it happens in your own home, we should not look away. The president was saying in his last message that if you see gender-based violence happening and you do not do anything, you are complicit, because ultimately your silence ensures that somebody is being abused. Now, if we make our communities, our areas, violence intolerant, perpetrators will not have an area where they start abusing. So we want to see more of the services going now to communities. The ministers and deputy ministers are going to provinces now as part of COVID-19 interventions. And we have linked that with gender-based violence to say, when you go to a community, we want to ensure that even community policing forums, we want to ensure that street committees now don't only deal with COVID, they also deal with gender-based violence, so that perpetrators will not have a place to start whether making funny jokes about women or abusing, because they will know that it is not done in my community. And so every person has a responsibility, but when it happens, the structures must ensure that they react fast, so that the survivor does not go through secondary victimization, and the perpetrator must be taken to the police immediately. And the community must be the one assisting the police for that person to be arrested, because more times we know where these people are, but we do not get involved. So that's what we want to see with the NSP going forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ramagoshi. I just wanted to ask one more question. And just given that there are already, I mean, the system that you are describing, and especially on the community level, you know, such structures exist sort of informally already. So you know, we have certain people who have, the police hasn't helped me. Someone might often now reach out on social media, and certain civil society actors will get involved who have local connections. So we're looking at sort of beefing up and formalizing that process.
Yes. Yes.
To counter where service delivery is failing, and so that everybody's sort of working together in a more formal way.
Yes.
Can I ask, how can people in communities, which you're speaking about, rally around the NSP? So when you speak about going to district level, we're looking at municipalities, and what you're saying very much speaks to the same process around the IDP. You know, where the municipalities have we want citizens to go. Would you encourage them to go to municipalities, or how can we get involved? I've already suggested that they download the document and read it. How can we, in communities, sort of mobilize around the National Strategic Plan and support whatever is going to be put in place?
I would definitely suggest that they go to municipalities, but we also, the Secretariat is going also to work with SALGA, South African Local Government Association, to ensure that they enhance the structures at local level. We unfortunately, COVID has really curtailed our movement, because what we were going to do was now to go at community level, also as national, to assist in creating the structures at the local level. But the municipalities have a role now, because we're saying either a councillor or a mayor chairs these local structures. So the municipalities have a role now to start having those structures at the local level. So they need to start to go to the local level, to say municipality member, councillor, this is what the NSP is doing. We are here. Can we start having that structure in place now? And we will maybe later come on board just to strengthen and support. But they can now immediately go to the municipality to say, this is what we are expected to do. We are available. We want to volunteer our services as a structure dealing with GBV in my community.
Okay. Mr. Ramagoshi, thank you so much for joining us. We are out of time, but this has been very, very helpful, and we wish the department and everyone else the best of luck with the implementation of the NSP.
Thank you very much. I hope we definitely will win this in our lifetime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Before we say goodbye, let's have a look at the journey of one woman who broke free from gender-based violence.
Kamanam was Cynthia Makakola, mother of 4 kids. When I met Ukai Bengtandana naye, bewubudo hloniphekile, handsome, unothando, wangithanda nabantwana bami. Bekuba mnandi endlini, nginomntana oyi-1 naye. And makangaphuzanga, bonke kubona ukuthi akusabantwana bakhe. Then 2009 waqala wakhipha ama-true colors wakhe. Bekangishaya, but always bengithatha yena ngimbeke phambili, mina ngiza emuva. Every day besiphila leyo mpilo leyo makadakiwe. Kwalokhu kuqhubeka but ungaboni mina ukuthi lo muntu uyangihlukumeza. Njalo makangishayile abanama-excuse nami ngiwa-accept ama-excuse wakhona, and always I used to blame myself ukuthi mhlambe yimi ngimchukuluzile, mhlambe yimi ngenze wrong. Ngikhumbula 2010 December, abantu mabathi happy, mina zange ngikhona ukuthi ngithi happy. Bengiphuke inyawo, angishayela abobhuti ekade sichashe nabo ejaridini ukuthi why bazothi happy new year kimi. 2014 it was Easter Monday. Savuka ekseni soyi-2, masivuka ekseni singabantu abayodrowa imali, kungabi na problem, sihambe soyi-2. Masifika endleleni ajike athini sikhohlwa ukushiyela abantwana imali esi-5, wajika makabuyela endlini wafika warape umntana. That was so sad because umntana bengimprotect estradeni, mayithi 5:30 abantwana bangena endlini, umntana warejwa endlini. Tema ngifike ecourt, ifamily yakibo beyimsupporta, bakhipha amagama ukuthi mangabe bengimthanda bengeke ngimbophisa, ungikhulisele abantwana, and izinto ezinje bezenzeka kudala. So I have to ukuthi mina ngifight for umntanami. After umntana marriage bebakhombana ngami abantu, lo bophisa indoda lo. Even my family bathi sazosicela impuphu lo, ucabanga ukuthi makabophisa indoda yakhe uzobanjwa ngani labantwana. Wagwetshwa wathola 2 life sentence, 50 years. Kuthe 2014 leyo savula i-organization i-Davidson Stand Up, ngathola abantwana abama-victim of rape and abasaba ukukhuluma, sibasiza labo bantwana labo nabomama kuma-domestic violence. No one has a right ukuthi akuhlukumeze, no one ukuthi acontrol impilo yakho ukuthi kumele uphile kanjani ngasiphi isikhathi.
The fight against gender-based violence is not just a government fight. It will take a collective effort for us to stop violence against women and children. One of the ways you can get involved is by downloading the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide at the Department of Justice website. That's at www.justice.gov.za. You can also look up the Call to Action Collective on Facebook and join a series of webinars on the NSP. That's all we have for this evening. I'm Lenina Rasool. Good night.